Alrighty, so welcome back, everyone. So this week is a follow-up to our presentation last week on L.I. Savich, who we learned was Lydia Ivanovna Savicz-Lubitzkaya, an important Soviet bryologist with a lot of different spellings for her name. And in that presentation, I mentioned that she worked with her husband, VP Savich, who was a lichenologist. And so today I thought it would be kind of fun to learn a little bit about him. So I'll start with one of his moss specimens that we actually have in our collection here. So you'll see here his name, VP Savich. And interestingly enough, this also says VP Savich. So this is actually how his name is spelled in Russian in Cyrillic characters. And the specimen is from 1908 in Russia. This is the moss here. It's called Sphagnum rousseaui, or Rousseau's sphagnum, or Rousseau's bog moss, and it's named after this gentleman here. So that's Edmund August Friedrich Rousseau, who was a Baltic German biologist and an authority on sphagnum mosses in the mid to late 1800s. And the moss itself, which you can see up here, is super pretty. And it's found in most of the Northern Hemisphere. And it's common in the margins of mires, the open portions of fens, up through the timberline in montane regions in wet coniferous forests. And since our collector this week was technically a lichenologist, not necessarily mainly a bryologist, I thought it would be fitting to include one of his lichen specimens. Now, we haven't gone to our lichens yet here at Tennessee, so this is actually from Idaho State. But you can see it was collected by VP Savich in 1926, also in Russia. The specimen here on the left, you can see it's kind of fragmented. It was identified on the specimen as Lechinora esculenta, aka Aspergillia esculenta. Now this is a crustose lichen that looks kind of similar to this. And one interesting note that popped up is there apparently have been called manna lichens and are believed to be a possible candidate for the manna that fell from the skies in the biblical Exodus story. Apparently, a number of the species in this genus, which are native to the Middle East, have been known to shrivel up and get blown around, like kind of tumbleweed style, and are sometimes said to even rain down when it's dry. And they are edible, and they have been used by nomadic peoples to make a type of bread. So kind of an intriguing cultural reference. But back to our collector. So VP Savich was Vsevolod Pavlovich Savich. And again, his name is spelled a number of different ways in the Roman alphabet. I was able to find, luckily I was still able to find a number of good sources about his life and career, and a better picture of him than the one I had last week. So that's kind of nice, much better than that terrible dark photocopy. But anyways, he was a Soviet botanist and lichenologist. He was born in 1885 in Babruysk, which is now in Belarus, but at that time was also part of the Russian Empire. From the age of 10, he attended a pro-gymnasium, which is kind of like a middle school, grade school in Mazyr, which is a little bit further south than Belarus. And then he moved to the Minsk Gymnasium for his kind of high school training, and he graduated in 1904. And that might sound familiar because if you remember from last week, his future wife, Lydia, also attended that same high school and graduated the following year. So, of course, no source said anything about when they met or when they got together, but it appears they might have known each other or met as early as high school. So after graduation, he enrolled and moved to study at the St. Petersburg University. He enrolled in the biological group of the Faculty of Physics and Mathematics. Interestingly, he also worked as an extra and in small acting roles in local theaters while he was a student. But it said he was fired in 1906 due to his participation in a street demonstration, but I don't have any more details about that. So also in 1906, he began working as a preparator and a curator for the university's herbarium, and also worked in concert with the Botanical Garden, which would later become the Botanical Institute, and even later the Komarov Institute of Botany, and he was involved with them for the rest of his career. He began to study lichenology under A.A. Elenkin, who is considered the father of Russian lichenology. And then in 1907, he became an assistant to V.L. Komarov, who is a notable Russian botanist, geographer, and professor, who had a really big impact on Savich's development as a scientist. And it did say that under Komarov, he worked as an assistant at the higher courses for women, which also might sound familiar from last week, if you remember, was the first higher education institution for women in Russia, and where Lydia actually attended starting in 1908. And again, it's kind of a suggestive coincidence. Again, there's no record if they met there or re-met there, if she went to St. Petersburg because he was there. There's really not a lot of information about their relationship at all in these articles, which makes me really wish I could find a copy of her manuscript of her autobiography, but not yet, so TBD about that. So he was active in scientific institutions and societies in his school, elected secretary to a couple of different botany and scientific groups. In 1907, under Komarov, he participated in a number of expeditions. So starting with working on floras of 2 different districts in Russia. And from 1908 to 1910, he participated in Komarov's expedition to Kamchatka and the Ussuri territory. And if one of those names sounds familiar again, it's possibly because last week I mentioned that Lydia was tasked with organizing mosses and bryological materials from a Kamchatka expedition. And at the time, I could only find really references to these 2 expeditions back in the 18th century, but it sounds like much more likely that she was working on materials from this contemporary expedition just to the same location. So again, another place that they presumably were working together. Oh, sorry, what happened to I clicked the link. Let me go back to that. There we go. Anyways, okay, yes. So anyways, on this trip, he collected a wealth of lichens, mushrooms, mosses, and algae, which instilled in him the importance of specimens. And also these specimens helped to form the foundation of the herbarium, a lichenological herbarium at the Botanical Institute. And in 1908, he read his first report to the Society of Naturalists about lichens from 2 of those regions in Russia. So in 1912, he graduated from university, but the following year, he actually joined the army. So he fought in Austria during World War I, but was exposed to poisonous gas and deemed unfit for combat service. So, and one source actually even said this might have saved his life because it kept him from being conscripted later on in later conflicts and wars. But anyways, by 1915, he was back collecting mosses with his then wife, Lydia. So again, I don't know when they got married, but they clearly had a lot of chances to run into each other up until this point. So in 1920, he became the scientific secretary of the Botanic Garden. And for the next 7 years, he participated in a number of scientific investigations and expeditions kind of across the Eastern Soviet Union. In 1930, he went on an Arctic expedition on this ice-breaking steamship here to this Franz Josef Land, the island of Novaya Zemlya, and they also participated in the first exploration of the Kara Sea, which is up in this region. In 1932, he became the head of the Department of Spore Plants at the Botanical Institute, and that included ferns, mosses, lichens, and fungi, even though they are not technically plants. And in 1934, he was awarded a doctorate of biological sciences, and in 1939 became a professor. During World War II, he worked alongside his wife, Lydia, that we mentioned last week, working and studying sphagnum as a medical dressing material. And he was also interested in studying the biochemicals found in lichens, so some of which have antibiotic properties. It also said that he worked with the perfume industry, which obviously involves a lot of chemistry. He was described as having a good taxonomist eye and described many new species and taxa. He published 180 scientific papers, largely on lichens and other cryptogamic groups on a range of topics, including taxonomy, morphology, ecology, and biochemistry. He was editor-in-chief of the Journal of Soviet Botany in the 1930s and edited a number of other journals, magazines, and books. He also compiled the well-known Exocaudae Lichenotheca russica. He's described as a wonderful organizer of scientists and continued to lead the spore department to become the Department of Spore Plants to become a highly authoritative scientific institution, not just in the USSR, but abroad. In the 1950s, the Soviet leader Khrushchev initiated Russian exploration of the Antarctic. And as part of that initiative, Savich was sent in the 1960s to survey and study Antarctic lichens. And he discovered a number of new species there with his students. And he remained quite active, but in 1972, he was tragically hit by a car while crossing the street and passed away a couple days later at the age of 87. So during his life, Savich received a number of awards for his work. Just like his wife, he received the Order of Lenin and the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. And he was also made an honored scientist of the USSR, basically the Russian Republic, in 1947. There are a number of taxa named after him, mostly lichens, but also at least one species of mushroom. And one source I read said that a peninsula on this island of Novaya Zemlya, there's a peninsula that is named after him. They got named after him during that expedition in 1930. Now, I was not able to find it on a map, but it's super complex coastline, so it's very possible it's there, and I just couldn't find it, but kind of to be confirmed. I don't know if he named it himself, but kind of cool if it's true. Specimen-wise, I found almost 400 specimens in the moss portal, 585 specimens in the lichen portal, and then over 400 in the mycoportal, which is a fungal database that I'm not sure if I've mentioned before. Again, some of those are mixed, some of them are from his wife Lydia, some of them are collected with his wife Lydia, and I'm sure I'm not getting all of them just because of how many different spellings they have of their names and how often it probably is mistranscribed. But hopefully we'll find some more with part of this project. And I did find just a couple other kind of interesting specimens I thought I'd share with you when I was looking at his records. So this one here, you can see VP Savich. But the packet itself, the specimen is wrapped up in looks like a page from a magazine or a book, a Russian book that has this really cute little rabbit illustration in it that I liked. This one here is kind of cool just for the images. So this is actually digitized by the Smithsonian. And you can see kind of this macro level picture, but they also have images at different magnification levels, which is really cool to see. And if you look back at my original specimen I started with, you can see that the year is 1908 and the region is this Kamchatka region. So this moss may have been one that was worked on by his wife Lydia when she was still a student processing specimens from that trip. And again, could have been one of their first kind of projects together as botanists. So kind of neat considering that they spent really the rest of their careers working together at the Botanical Institute. So that is Vsevolod Pavlovich Savich. And again, I will end with a quote from one of his articles, which said, "A talented scientist, a brilliant organizer, a versatile and experienced editor and teacher, Savich belonged to the generation of scientists who laid the foundations for the study of lower plants in our country. He devoted a lot of energy and effort to the organization of research on all sections of spore plants, thereby contributing to the development of each of them as an independent branch of botanical science. An extraordinary mind, exceptional diligence, and great enthusiasm for the objects of his research, lichens allowed Savich in a short time to become one of the leading lichenologists of our country." So kind of interesting story. Again, great couple to follow up on. And yeah, thanks again for listening.